We have a lot of NFL news to break down, along with the New York Rangers. Their on-ice performance has been something. I think that's one word to describe it. But first of all, before we get into that, Swig, how are you doing?
Doing pretty well, man. Did you have a good weekend?
I did. I gotta watch some baseball for free, so that's always good, and it's a lot of fun stuff. Couple of busy assignments, but that's beside the point. But how about you?
Yeah, not too bad, man. Getting ready for March Madness. It's been a long 2 years without it. Watched a good chunk of college basketball over the weekend. Getting very excited for the tournament, so I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, we are, and it's going to be fun this year. It's nice to have that back. But let's get into the Rangers news without further ado. And goaltender Igor Shesterkin got injured. He has a strained groin right now. Keith Kincaid saw his first action in a Rangers uniform the other day. And in our hockey preview, we talked about Kincaid when Vinny Milani joined the show. We talked about him being that depth option of a goalie like that. And I think it can only do wonders for having someone that has experience as your third and not just some random kid like we've seen a couple times. I think Columbus has tried it, and I think Carolina's tried it with their new goalie. And there's just been a lot of things going on there. And also, so basically, what do you think about Shesterkin?
Yeah, I'll get into that in a second. With Carolina, they actually tried that 42-year-old emergency goalie that one time. Remember that?
Ayers.
Leafs lost to a Zamboni driver. Love that. But anyway, with the Rangers, for the most part, they've been getting healthier, except for the Igor Shesterkin news. Anyone who didn't see that one, that happened last Thursday night, I believe, so a week ago by the time this episode drops. At the end of a Rangers 6-2 or 6-3 win over the Devils. They won 2 games in a row. I forget which one was 6-2. I think it was the game that Igor got hurt. But in the third period of that game, with the Rangers well in hand for that one, not long before he left the game, a few seconds before that, Devils player skated through the crease and Shesterkin's right leg buckled underneath him a little bit, but he stayed in the game. And then the next time the Devils had a scoring opportunity, when he moved side to side to try to make a save, he sprawled out pretty good and couldn't put any weight on his right leg. And that was very, very concerning as a Rangers fan, and also wanting him to be okay as a person, of course. But it took a couple people to help him off. And I know all Rangers fans were holding their breath, waiting for the news on his injury status. Came out on Friday where it was a strained groin. For now, he's day to day. If I'm the Rangers, breathing a sigh of relief because it looked a lot worse than that. If it ends up being a couple of weeks, I think that's fine. It's a lot better than the alternative.
Yeah, and I think right now, knowing where you're at with your team right now, and he's such a young player, you want to make sure, don't rush him back. Make sure that he's 100% healthy. But speaking of young players on this team, Pavel Buchnevich is having a heck of a season. I think he's tallied 19 points through the 23 games this season. So he's locked in out there on the ice. And also, Alexis Lafreniere is starting to turn it up a little bit, taking him a little while to dust off the training wheels, if you will. And since then, he's sort of been shining.
He's been a lot better of late. One of the few silver linings to Artemi Panarin, still on sabbatical right now, is Alexis Lafreniere being moved up into the top 6. He's been playing on that top line with Mika Zibanejad and Buchnevich, which is a much better fit for his offensive skill than when he was down playing with Brett Howden earlier in the season. Offense intended, by the way. He's been absolutely useless. But Lafreniere has definitely been better after a bit of a slow start. He had that the only 1 point in the first, I think, 18 or 19 games, which is that overtime winning goal against the Sabres, but was pretty quiet otherwise. He was generating chances, though, getting better each game. And once he got moved up, he played 1 game on a line with Artemi Panarin. It was Panarin's last game before the sabbatical, but he scored a goal in that game. He had a 4-game point streak, had a multi-point game. So he's been better. Buchnevich has been good, but you mentioned him being young. He's actually, amazingly, one of the elder statesmen on the Rangers at the old age of 25.
Yeah, that speaks to the youth on this team. I mean, they're very young, and coming in, we had at least I did. I had a little bit of high expectations for this team. I thought they could have succeeded and taken off. I mean, you look at the depth on this team, it's just insane. But right now, it's like they're still trying to learn how to win, learning how to play together. It's a very tough division that they're in right now. And I think it can only get better playing this high competition. And you're going night in, night out with these same young players that will be there for many years. It's not like they're just going to leave at the end of the season. Like this, they're establishing a core here. They're trying to build with it. And one other name to bring up is on the defensive side with Adam Fox. I thought he's looked fantastic so far this year. Has a lot of assists. He's got a +5 rating on defense, so I think he's been okay.
Fox has been great. I mean, that's okay is honestly an understatement for him. He's been the Rangers' best defenseman by a country mile. He looked really good last year. He's only built on it. He's gotten better in his own end. He's so confident with the puck and very poised, intelligent player. Him and Lindgren are a very solid top defensive pair for the Rangers. I do think we need to hit on their defense a little bit. While it's still not perfect, it has been significantly improved from last season when the Rangers were just hemorrhaging shots in their own zone. And I don't say that even sarcastically. They were getting absolutely shelled by every defensive metric. They were leaving the front of the net open, which is not exactly a good place to leave a lot of space for your opponents. And Lindy Ruff, who's now the Devils coach, was the Rangers defensive coach. They brought in Jacques Martin when Ruff took the Devils job. And I think we're starting to see his impact because despite the fact that the Rangers defensively, Keandre Miller has missed some time. Jacob Trouba missed a few weeks with a broken thumb. The Tony DeAngelo situation where he's still on exile right now. And then various games missed by Jack Johnson, who we all know sucks. And you get the picture. Even despite all the turnover and the relative lack of talent on the defense, they're allowing significantly fewer shots per game. Their penalty kill has absolutely thrived. That has been a bright spot on the special teams. They've killed 50 of their last 53 penalties. They still need to stop taking so many damn penalties, but one step at a time. They've been significantly better in their own zone, and that's definitely taken some of the pressure off the goaltending.
Yeah, and to your point about the defense, I thought they've really stepped up and played well so far this year. I mean, they're piecing it together, of course, with all the injuries, but Libor Hayek was someone that I thought has stepped in and looked nice. I mean, you probably didn't expect to have some sort of a big role on this team coming in, but he stepped in, and I thought he's looked pretty good.
Hayek has been better, which is encouraging, but you definitely have to think about what the Rangers invested into him. So there's a couple factors. Libor Hayek was brought over from the Lightning in the trade that sent Ryan McDonagh and JT Miller to Tampa Bay. And those are two very big names, obviously. McDonagh in particular was the Rangers' best defenseman for years. Miller's been a productive top six forward, and that he's really thrived in Vancouver. But the Rangers got back Hayek and Brett Howden in that trade. Howden sucks. I'm just going to say it. I don't think he has a point in 23 games this season. He definitely doesn't have any goals. And outside of some decent penalty killing, I'm not a fan. But Hayek was the guy that the Rangers really prioritized getting in that trade. And he didn't, frankly, play very well when he got to the AHL. He's been injured in the NHL a lot. And even this season, he was the Rangers' 9th choice on defense. You typically dress 6 defensemen for a game. The Rangers, Lindgren and Fox aren't going anywhere. Neither are Keandre Miller and Jacob Trouba when they're healthy. But it took DeAngelo being in exile and then various injuries to Brendan Smith and Jack Johnson to finally get Hayek into the lineup where he was mostly playing with Anthony Bitetto. So he was basically a last-ditch option for the Rangers. I think he's been better of late. I thought he played his best game since he got called back up last night in that horrible game against Pittsburgh, but he has definitely been better. To me, though, he is still a third pairing defenseman at best. And considering that the Rangers could have gotten a Mikhail Sergachev or a Braden Point in that trade, I'm still disappointed with that.
Yeah, the return wasn't the best on that McDonagh trade as of right now. I mean, Hayek's still trying to find himself. He could turn into something nice, but obviously he's not going to be Mikhail Sergachev. Yeah, I think you could throw that one out of the window.
He's not going to be Mikhail Sergachev. One other thing I do need to point out, in addition to Howden and Hayek, the current NHL players being the centerpiece of that trade, they did also get a first-round pick, which they used to select Niels Lundqvist, who's currently playing in Sweden, but he is a top prospect for the Rangers that they're very high on. And he is going to be, I think, an impact defenseman in the NHL. So it's not like that trade was a total shit show, but overall, I'd say it was more bad than good. But Hayek has definitely been better, and I do want to continue to see him get those opportunities. I thought Anthony Bitetto was decent, but Hayek has been better. And when the Rangers defense started to get healthier, Bitetto was sent down to the taxi squad instead of Hayek. So he's moved up one spot on the pecking order. I think that's a good start.
Yeah, it is. And you talk about Lundqvist. I mean, look, the Rangers had some success with the name Lundqvist before. It'd be nice to see that continue again. But speaking of success, they're 4-2 in their last 6 games. I think they're kind of starting to ride some sort of this momentum, but then you also got to factor in they have the Penguins, Bruins, Flyers, and Capitals coming up. So a tough stretch of games without your best goaltender. So it's going to be tough to win some of these. What do you think the Rangers need to do to come out victorious?
Well, first of all, honestly, they do need to stop taking penalties. That has been an Achilles heel for the Rangers all season. They've had some bad luck, but they've also just been very stupid at times. And considering the division, you mentioned 4 of the 5 teams in that division. The Islanders, unfortunately, are also a very good team who are red hot at the moment. Basically, the Rangers' ceiling in the best division in hockey is probably to finish 6th out of 8. They have won more games recently, but most of them were over the Devils and the Sabres, who are the 2 teams below the Rangers. So they're kind of just picking on the lesser competition a little bit. I think that's to be expected for the most part. The Rangers, with the tough schedule coming up, if they can win, I'd say 3 of those 8 games, that's probably a best case scenario. In terms of their offense, I think we need to hit on that. Chris Kreider has been significantly better in recent weeks after a very, very shitty start to the season. He has 2 hat tricks in the Rangers' last 6 games. He's been driving the net, been screening goalies on the power play. But that is one other thing. The Rangers' power play needs to be a lot better. I have said that pretty much every damn year of my entire life. They finished in the top 10 in the power play last year. That was the one exception. But this year, they're right back down to 26th. They're not shooting the damn puck, which is a problem any Rangers fan can tell you has existed for decades. And if they don't start to be more aggressive with their scoring chances, they're going to lose tight games.
The thing that frustrates me in the NHL and all levels of hockey is when you're on the power play and you pass. Oh crap! It's intercepted. Clear it down the ice. I mean, you're killing your own power play when you don't shoot the puck. So I'm a big believer in couple passes, set it up one time, blast it, and then reset, try to do it again. But I mean, it's always tough to watch as a fan when they're not shooting the puck because at home and in the stadium, you're sitting there screaming shoot, but they won't shoot.
Man. That is the story of my life as a Rangers fan. I mean, my dad taught me that one from an early age, and not much has really changed. But yeah, that's typically the Rangers' biggest problem is either not getting a clean zone entry or overpassing and eventually leading to a clear. Frankly, I mean, they don't have the same talent as a team like the Oilers on the power play, but if they start to just be aggressive and shoot, good things are more likely to happen. And another team that's not having a good year but does have a good power play is the Buffalo Sabres. They are about 34%, I believe, despite all of their other struggles. And that kind of ties into one other point. We want to talk about the Jack Eichel rumors a little bit.
Yeah, Jack Eichel. Ooh, bring him to the Madison Square Garden. I mean, we talked about these rumors for a long time now. I mean, it's gone back in previous episodes. Go back and check them out. And we're not taking credit for any of this. We know that it's been seen around. But I think it would be interesting because we talked about the lack of faceoffs, the lack of center depth on this team, on how they can win the faceoffs. You bring over someone, Jack Eichel. Jack Eichel can really help your team. He's not just going to win you faceoffs. He plays well in the offensive and defensive zone, and he looks defeated over there at Buffalo. And that's not just a lack of his character. It's just every single time he goes out on the ice, it's like he knows that they cannot win a hockey game.
Well, the Sabres, yeah, they usually are defeated literally and metaphorically when they step on the ice. I mean, they've been one of the worst teams in hockey for about a decade now. Long story short with the Sabres is they are struggling mightily right now. They just lost 3 straight games to the Islanders. I think they've lost 7 games in a row overall. One of those was to the Rangers. They've had some big struggles with some of their big names, with Jeff Skinner being scratched for 3 games and going 16 games without a goal. Taylor Hall hasn't scored in a really long time. Eichel, even he's been quieter than usual. And then one of their few bright spots was Linus Ullmark, the goalie, and he got hurt, and he's out for a month. So basically, the Sabres GM and president held the press conference saying everyone but Rasmus Dahlin is on the table. And it doesn't take a genius to know that the Rangers' weakest position is their center depth, and Eichel is an elite player who happens to be a center, and the Rangers have the young talent and the prospect pool to pull off a trade. And I would be shocked if the Rangers don't at least throw their hat into the ring. They're a big market team, and we've seen this happen several times where they're connected to a big player, eventually end up with them a year or two later. We could go back to Rick Nash. We could go to Artemi Panarin. We could go to Kevin Shattenkirk. There are several examples. Eichel very well could be the next one. The question would be, what would the trade package have to be in order to get him?
Yeah. Hey, would you be upset if that Lundqvist kid, Niels Lundqvist, is in the deal?
I feel like he is likely to be included in the trade, frankly. So I think that one thing that's good for the Rangers is considering I think Eichel is highly likely to demand a trade after the season when the Sabres missed the playoffs for the 9th or 10th straight season, including all 6, I believe, that Eichel's been in the league. And that's going to limit the Sabres' leverage, which is great for whoever's acquiring him. He'll cost a little bit less. He's still not going to come cheap. I think the Rangers are going to have Alexis Lafreniere, Capo Caco, and Adam Fox off limits. I don't think there's a chance that any of those 3 are included. But Eichel is still an elite player who's not going to be cheap to acquire, even if the Rangers do have more leverage. So I think that they're going to have to give up at least one roster player. I think that the Sabres are going to start with Philip Hedl, looking for a center to replace Jack Eichel, go down the middle with Dylan Cousins. I think they might be interested in Pavel Buchnevich as well. So it could be one or both of them. I think if it's one of those two, and then Niels Lundqvist or another prospect, and then a first-round pick, maybe a 2 second-round pick, that could do it. Or it could be both Hedl and Buchnevich and a couple of picks and no prospects. I think that's the baseline of where that trade would start. I really like Hedl and Buchnevich, but you're not going to get a guy like Jack Eichel without giving up at least one NHL quality caliber forward in the deal.
Yeah, that's well put. I mean, he's not going to come cheap. I mean, any talent, any young talent is not going to come cheap, whether it doesn't matter what the sport is. I mean, we've seen it multiple times in baseball where, I mean, heck, whenever a young player breaks out, it's like whenever you have that opportunity to acquire someone that isn't in a good situation, the return is almost immeasurable because you don't know how much you need to give up, and neither side wants to part ways with what they're giving up, but sometimes it works out, and I think it's something the Rangers should try.
It's definitely going to be a big storyline to keep an eye out for in the offseason. I don't think it's going to happen at the trade deadline or anything. I do think the Sabres will get rid of Taylor Hall, unload him on somebody, but the Eichel thing is going to be a much bigger situation. Frankly, at least at first glance, I think the Rangers and the Los Angeles Kings are the 2 biggest teams in terms of their young talent, needs a center. They have the assets to get him. And I think both of those 2 being the 2 biggest markets in the country, and they can afford with the salary cap, Jack Eichel salary cap hit, they're going to be teams that make a big play for him.
Yeah, and talking about salary, we're going to switch over to the NFL. Marcus May, Jet that we talked about before, the big safety, he got the franchise tag. And what does this say about the Jets team going forward?
Well, we've talked about this a couple of times with the little season recap and the big NFL free agency preview, that the Jets have made it clear that keeping Marcus May around was going to be their number 1 priority in terms of in-house players. Marcus May kind of took over as the leader, both in terms of productivity and in the locker room in that secondary after Jamal Adams was traded. And what that franchise tag allows is it allows whatever team is using it to negotiate a long-term deal with that player until July 15th. If they do not come to a long-term agreement by then, the player will play out that 1-year deal on the franchise tag. That tag is worth a different amount of money depending on your position. In Marcus May's case, he's a safety. It's going to be worth about $10.5 million for this upcoming season. I have no doubt that the Jets, they have the finances to sign him to a long-term deal. I would be shocked if they don't get a deal done, but in the meantime, that keeps May from signing elsewhere as an unrestricted free agent.
Yeah, we've seen that a couple times with the franchise tag. Sometimes players decide to hold out or opt out until they get their deal. We've seen it with Le'Veon Bell. Yannick Ngakoue tried it a little bit in Jacksonville, and there's just players over time that just want to find a way to hold out. Zeke Elliott did it for a little while until he got his contract extension late in training camp, but it's interesting for sure.
Right. They won't be the last ones to do that either. If you're a player, you want to get that long term security before a possible injury happens and you don't get that same chance later in your career. These players are not just playing for their own financial securities, but going for that big money deal. They want it for their families as well. I don't blame them at all for trying to make sure they get that contract signed before a big injury happens because they still get paid in that instance. So Marcus May, he's a very, very solid player, clearly the leader on that Jets secondary. Actually, the first Jets player to get the franchise tag since Muhammad Wilkerson in 2016. And that is, oof, that just feels like a lifetime ago with the whole Wilkerson fiasco. But one other thing I should mention with the franchise tag is every team can only use it on one player every year. They do not have to use it. A lot of teams don't, but it's not like every player can be tagged to keep him off the market for those who don't know.
Yeah, that's a safe call going with Marcus May as your franchise. As you talked about the financial reasons, and by far the best player. I don't know about on the defense. Quinn Williams is good, but we'll see. Anyway, we got another safety to talk about the franchise tag. That's Justin Simmons in Denver, and he has been one of the best young safeties in the league for a while. I'm curious to see if this is sort of a franchise sign and trade situation. Do you think you could see something, or you think he's going to sign that tag?
I think he's going to stay too. Justin Simmons, like you mentioned, is also a safety, but he actually got franchise tag for the second consecutive year. So Denver gave him that franchise tag last offseason. He got the valuation of most likely around 10 million. It was probably a little less last year than what May's getting. But when you get the tag that second year in a row, your salary is locked in as 20% more than whatever you got on the first franchise tag. So in Simmons' case, he's going to be making around 13 million, but the Broncos have made it very clear that he is their priority to get signed to a long-term deal. He's been a great value. I believe he was a third-round pick in 2016, and he's turned into one of the elite safeties in the game. The Broncos have plenty of holes on that roster overall, but he is absolutely someone that's going to be prioritized. They've had some negotiations. I would be shocked if he's not kept.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for them. Broncos sort of in a rebuild sort of situation where the division's really good and they don't have a lot of wiggle room with anything they're doing. The quarterback's been a mess. Even, I mean, the only time that it hasn't been a mess was with Elway and whenever Peyton Manning got his butt over there for a few years. But anyway, we got Brandon Sheriff news also. Lineman, he got the franchise tag with the football team, and this one's an interesting one as well.
It is. He also, like Simmons, got it for the second consecutive year. I do think his situation is a lot more fluid and up in the air. So Scherf has been a fantastic guard. He was drafted, I believe, as a tackle originally out of Iowa. He was a top 10 pick, but he's been a Pro Bowl guard 4 times for the Washington football team. And he is absolutely worth the money when he's healthy, but that's the biggest issue for Scherf. He has been placed on injured reserve twice. He's missed a lot of games in his career. And for the offensive guard, so he got the 20% increase over the first year's tag as well. Right now, that franchise tag is worth about $18 million. So the Washington's going to have to either figure out a long-term deal to sign him to reduce that cap hit, or I don't think it's impossible if they can't that they just rescind that tag, kind of like the Panthers did with Josh Norman a few years ago to avoid having that much of a salary cap hit for a guy who has had trouble staying on the field. But he is great when he's healthy.
He is great when he's healthy, and the football team have done a good job of wiggling money around. You saw them part ways with Alex Smith. I thought that was interesting, and then it's just huge for them. And then the Thomas Davis situation where they let him go. So they're not big on stories. I feel like Washington. Any good story there, they're just like, all right, you got enough out of you. You're done.
I mean, would you expect anything less of a team owned by Dan Snyder?
That's fair. That's fair. Anyway, we have another offensive lineman, this time a trade. Isaiah Wilson. They gave up on him early. The Tennessee Titans, that is. He'll be heading to Miami in a deal with a seventh rounder swap as well in that one.
Yeah, that one's, I think, really, really interesting. The Titans took Isaiah Wilson at the end of the first round, just in last year's draft. And he was an absolute nightmare before the season even started. He had more off-field issues than snaps played. And I don't even mean that sarcastically. He played 4 snaps in 2020 for the Titans. So he barely was on the field. He had two off-field instances of, let's say, behavioral issues. He was busted at some party that got shut down over the summer, where he was on the second floor balcony and apparently considered jumping for a minute, which is pretty scary. Let's hope everything's okay there. And then slightly less dark, still pretty terrible. One of the other big behavioral issues for him is he got a DUI, I believe, in September. It wasn't a great start in terms of off the field. He was also on the reserve COVID list twice during the season. So a bunch of factors, some attitude adjustments possibly. It's essentially a fresh start for both sides. And one footnote I do want to put out here is that, why the Dolphins are buying really, really low on him is he actually went to the same high school as Brian Flores, their head coach, and Wilson, who went to Georgia. The Dolphins drafted Solomon Kinley, who's a guard from Georgia in last year's draft. So there's a couple of familiarity connections there, and there's literally zero risk for the Dolphins to give this guy a shot. But the Titans getting let's say 4 snaps out of a guy in 1 year that they invested a first round pick into kind of reminds me of the Giants only getting 1 year out of DeAndre Baker, another guy out of Georgia who was a late first round pick.
Yeah, Georgia doesn't get the biggest rep there. But anyway, I like that you brought up DeAndre Baker. Obviously, you probably don't like that we brought up DeAndre Baker, but it's a similar connection there. And we're going to get into the Giants news real quick with Golden Tate. He got cut. We kind of expected that when you hinted at it in the football preview episode. But what does this say about the Giants moving forward now that Tate's gone?
Well, it says that the Giants are definitely trying to create some financial flexibility. I thought Golden Tate was a pretty obvious one from the start. Frankly, I hated that damn contract the second it was signed. I mean, I won't hit on that long, but when the Giants traded Odell Beckham Jr., they tried to bring in Golden Tate, who was clearly not quite the player he was when he at the end of his tenure with the Lions and his brief stint with the Eagles. And Gettleman gives a 31-year-old clone of Sterling Shepard a 4-year contract. I mean, that was just clearly a shitty move, and they're filling the hole they created for themselves by trading Beckham, who was at the top of his career at the time, or at least close to it. So anyway, Golden Tate has slugged his way through 2 pretty mediocre seasons in New York. He didn't even play the first 4 games his first year because he had the PED suspension. So it was pretty obvious this wasn't going to last for all 4 years. The Giants also, it sounds like Kevin Zeitler, the right guard, who I'd argue is the Giants' best and most consistent offensive lineman, he is also going to be cut here unless they can find a trade partner. And I really do find that fascinating. He is going to create more cap savings, around 12 million, I believe, compared to Tate, who will get either 6 million or maybe 10 if he's cut after June 1st. That's a procedural thing. But Zeitler is not going to be an easy guy to replace. If the Giants are rolling into next season with their guards as Will Hernandez and Shane Lemieux, they are absolutely screwed. And I do think Zeitler is a really good representation, though, of the financial impact we're seeing the pandemic have around the league, because Kyle Van Noy on the Dolphins was the first of those veteran players to fall, that domino that kind of started this train of cuts of productive players who are on pretty sizable contracts. And we're seeing guys like that just end up getting cut just for the financial reasons.
Yeah, that is something. I like that you brought up Van Noy. Very descriptive words with the Golden Tate situation where you're going back and forth of finding creative ways to get at it. And I remember you texted me the day that they signed him. You're like, I don't like this. You said, I don't like this. You said they're trying to fill a void and replacing him with a worse version. And frankly, they did. And I like your clone of Sterling Shepard reference there.
I mean, Frank, look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm right about everything I say with my sports teams. There are times where I'm just, cynical and they do prove me wrong. But I honestly thought the Tate situation was pretty predictable. I saw that one coming. I wish he proved me wrong, but that contract was pretty stupid from the start. It never got any better. He had minimal production, but it's not even about that. I mean, trading a better player to sign a worse one to a pretty big contract, it's just very questionable. I don't think there's any doubt that the Giants are going to draft a wide receiver or at least a playmaker in the first round of this draft, because they don't really have the finances to sign one in free agency. So I would be shocked if the Giants don't. Gettleman said it himself that it's no secret we need playmakers. So if they don't end up with a Jalen Waddle or somebody like that in the first round to replace him, I would be surprised.
Before we get into the Dak Prescott news real quick, I want to ask you real quick. Now, I know we haven't gotten into the draft stuff yet, but I'm just gonna throw this meatball at you and see if you want it. Would you be okay if the Giants took Kyle Pitts?
Yes, yes, I would. But I am worried that Jason Garrett would absolutely ruin him. I like Pitts a lot as a prospect, and I know we're going to get into that here in the upcoming weeks in a little teaser for any fans listening. But yeah, I've watched a lot of Pitts. He is not just a tight end. You ignore that that's technically his position. He is an absolute chess piece that a smart and creative offensive coordinator would line up all over the field. He can be used on any route. Motion him all over the place to confuse and stretch out the defense. So yes, short version, I would be okay with him. I don't think he's actually going to fall to number 11, but he would be if you do want to think of him as a tight end, he's a much better player than Evan Ingram is.
Yeah, he's definitely more sure-handed. Probably has one of the best hands in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a little teaser on my side of things. But anyway, let's get into the Dak Prescott situation. He got a big contract, 4 years, 160 million, I believe, is the total. And they've been going back and forth, him and Jerry, trying to figure out a way to pay him. And he finally got his due.
He did, and he deserves it, I think. As much as I hate the Cowboys, Prescott has been a very, very good quarterback for the Cowboys, especially the last couple of seasons. The contract negotiations have strung on for 3 off seasons in his case, which is a little unusual. But you look at him being a 4th-round pick in 2016, and then the top 2 picks in that draft were Jared Goff and Carson Wentz, and they got their big deals. And you could make the argument Prescott's been much better than both of them overall. Honestly have no doubt that he'll come back from the broken ankle he suffered the Giants game last year and still be a productive quarterback on a pretty exciting offensive team that has Elliott locked up. They have Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb, Blake Jarwin. So the offense, I don't think, is going to be the problem in Dallas. I'm just curious to see what they do on the defense, because that is an issue.
Yeah, their defense is an issue. They cut some of the veterans they tried last year. None of them really worked. It's a benefit to the Giants, but it seemed like their defensive players they brought in, I think Everson Griffin was one of them, and I think there was another tackle I'm forgetting on the defensive side, but they just brought in some of these guys, and then they just did. Don Terry Poe was another one, but
and Gerald McCoy.
Gerald McCoy was another one. That's right. Yeah. None of them worked.
Dusting off the brain last offseason's moves. But the Cowboys, like every other team, they're going to have to be a little bit more mindful in terms of the finances. They have some very clear needs on the second level, third level of that defense. I think they have a little bit more in place at the front 4. I mean, we all know how good DeMarcus Lawrence is when he's healthy. And if they can get Leighton Vander Esch to stay on the field, I mean, he's a very impact player, but he's had some injuries. So I am very curious to see how the Cowboys approach this offseason, but getting their quarterback locked up was a clear priority, as it should be. That's the most important position on the team. Prescott is 27, I believe. He's signed through the 2024 season, so he'll only be 31 when this deal expires. If he's still productive, he can get another big money contract.
He could, and I don't see what the Cowboys were thinking when they took Vander Esch. They just drafted another Sean Lee. Oh, that's a shot. But anyway, the quarterback situation, Dak Prescott, Dallas, cross that off the list of Russell Wilson sweepstakes. Russell Wilson, he's now down to 3 teams on his list. The Bears are one of those teams still remaining. So obviously this isn't a 33% shot because he still has to be traded in the first place. Seattle's still on the list, and I think that's where he'll end up anyway. But what do you think about the Bears? And let's just think about it. Think about it real quick. Russell Wilson to the Bears, initial thoughts, if that happens.
I think it's another example of Bears fans deluding themselves into thinking that they're just going to get a magical QB that fixes everything after 60 years of crap. But obviously, if he does become available, if the Seahawks do actually trade him and the Bears can end up with him, yeah, you absolutely make that trade. He is worth a lot, and the Bears will have no problem giving up a lot. Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace were brought back for 2021, but I think it's fair to say that they are holds on their jobs are a little tenuous. It's got to be a prove it kind of season for them. So if the opportunity to get an elite quarterback presents itself, you better believe they're going to pick up the phone and make that offer as quickly as they possibly can. But the other teams on that list for Russell Wilson, Dallas was one. They're obviously not a suitor anymore with Prescott being brought back. But the other 2 besides the Bears were the Saints and the Raiders. Frankly, I think the Raiders of those four or of those three now are the most likely to end up with him. But Chicago, I have no problem with them at least throwing their hat in the ring. But I mean, what kind of trade package do you think they could throw at Seattle for him?
Oh, that's tough. I don't know, but I don't feel like there is someone on the roster you can't trade for him. I mean, you look at the franchise of the Chicago Bears and you look at all the things that they have had. They've had the defense. They haven't had the quarterback. You go back in time. There hasn't been a single good quarterback in this franchise. Sure, you have a good year for once in a while from Cutler. You get the big season, not necessarily big season, but the big run with McMahon as the quarterback. He was on that team. He wasn't the big successful guy, but he was on the team. He was a part of it. So the quarterback hasn't been the best player on the Bears team ever. And you go back in time, never there. But Russell Wilson, the second that he comes on the roster, is the best player on the team. And that's something the Bears have never had. I know I keep saying that, but it's true. So if I'm Ryan Pace, I'm forgetting this narrative in my head that says I cannot evaluate a quarterback to save my life. I cannot do anything right at the quarterback position, whether it's paying Mike Glennon, whether it's trading up to take Trubisky. I'm throwing everything that I have. Every single player on the roster would be dealt to get Russell Wilson because I think that's a job-saving move, and I think it could extend his tenure in Chicago for a long time.
It's the type of move that I mean, a desperate GM or even just an aggressive one. It might not be somebody that's desperate to hold on to their job, but that's the opportunity that they're going to make because he would be a massive upgrade to the team immediately. Obviously, would it solve all their problems? No, but amazingly enough, the Bears have a better offensive line than Seahawks do, so Wilson might be a little bit more comfortable. And if the Bears are able to, they might place the franchise tag on Allen Robinson. I'm sure we'll talk about that here at some point coming up soon, but if they can keep him around, Wilson will still have somebody to throw to. But I mean, you got to think realistically in terms of the packages. I don't see a feasible scenario where he ends up with the Saints. Because if we kind of saw this with the Stafford trade to the Rams, where Goff went back the other way, and these teams that are giving up a quarterback are at least going to need somebody to play the position in the short term before a successor can be found, right? And if you're the Bears, with Trubisky being a free agent and his option not being picked up, Nick Foles has to be sent back the other way. That's a pretty massive downgrade for the Seahawks, to put it lightly. So I think the Bears' best package would end up being something like Foles, Khalil Mack, and 2 first-round picks, and I think a second-rounder as well, at a minimum. And we're for the Seahawks to be interested. But even that, considering the massive dead cap hit that the Seahawks would have, I would be surprised. I think the Raiders are the most logical of the teams because Derek Carr is a much closer quarterback to Wilson than Nick Foles is. And I think the Raiders, who can also throw in a couple picks and maybe a Max Crosby type, would have a better overall package in terms of assets than the Bears could throw over there.
He could. And also going back to that, talking about Vegas there, I think it's more logical for the Raiders to take a swing on him, or not necessarily take a swing, but you know what I mean when it comes to trading. And on Seattle's side, you're trading him to the AFC, so it's a completely different conference there. If it's the NFC, you're still having some sort of thing in the back of your mind that says he's still going to an opponent of ours, like not necessarily an opponent, but you could see him again in the postseason to where he could knock you out. So I think it's more logical for them to try to find an AFC suitor of those teams, which is, I believe, one on the list. I can't think of the third team. It was
the Saints, the Raiders, and the Bears.
Yeah, that's one AFC team. So definitely, I think that would be interesting. But that's actually going to be our poll question that you mentioned was that package. And check it out on Twitter at the Big City Sports PD. Would Foles, Mack, and 2 first-rounders be too much to acquire Russell Wilson? What do you think?
I honestly don't think so. I mean, the quarterback position is that important. And the Bears, while Khalil Mack would be a big loss, they still have Roquan Smith. They still have a pretty good defense overall. It would be difficult for them to get another pass rusher in the draft because their first rounder would be going the other way. But I definitely think it's a really fascinating scenario. Overall, though, I think the Bears are more likely to end up with a lower tier QB because I still don't think the Seahawks are actually going to trade him either. I have no idea why they would do that. It doesn't make any damn sense. But in terms of the QB next year, we all know Trubisky's out the window. And I think they're more likely to end up with, a Marcus Mariota, Cam Newton, maybe a Jameis Winston, compared to Wilson, a much shittier option.
I think Trubisky has a better shot of all 3 of those. but we'll find out about that. But anyway,
I don't see that one.
this might be back-to-back bad takes, both with that statement of Trubisky. This one might be the worst take, but I found it interesting. Now you're going to call me insane for this, but you look at one player on the Bears roster that got a 2-year contract. Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham. What if he has that connection with Russell Wilson, played before, they're good friends? What if he's the deciding factor to bring Chicago their first ever franchise quarterback?
I mean, I hope that this washed up version of Jimmy Graham isn't what tips the scales. I mean, no, Graham's had a Hall of Fame career as a tight end, but I mean, this version of Jimmy Graham, I really hope he's not the deciding factor in one of the best players in the league getting traded, because that would be really, really stupid.
That would definitely take the backseat of both of us roasting the Jimmy Graham contract last year, because it turned into a franchise quarterback coming over.
I guess the no trade clause means no blocking, but you get a good quarterback out of
it. Sort of like what he did in Seattle. But anyway, talking about old connections, we have another one here with the Brooklyn Nets. Blake Griffin is back with DeAndre Jordan, this time in Brooklyn. And I think this is going to be interesting. A veteran, you can steal him off the streets, and he's someone that could really help this team out.
I mean, the rich get richer in the Eastern Conference, man. Hit on the NBA here really quick. Blake Griffin's been with the Pistons the last couple of seasons after those days with DeAndre Jordan with the Clippers. The Pistons are not good, to put it mildly, and they got to the point where they bought out what was left of Blake Griffin's contract as they're kind of going through a rebuild. And Blake Griffin, logically enough, wants to sign with a contender. And it became clear that the Nets were the front runners right away. He is not obviously the player that he was in his peak with the Clippers and Lob City, but he's still a productive forward who can play both positions in the front court, provide a little scoring and rebounding. And he does have that old chemistry with DeAndre Jordan. So I'm curious to see what happens there.
Maybe some Lob City magic?
Maybe a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I hope they don't get Chris Paul out of this, too.
Yeah, just bring him over. Just reinvent the system. Just an old
the Suns are finally in position to end their big playoff drought. We'll just trade Chris Paul to be nice.
Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today. Just a quick mention on the Nets, but so far everything went well, I thought. But looking forward to what's coming next on the Big City Sports Podcast. We have baseball, a big season coming up for all 4 of our teams. Interesting season. The Cubs have their contract issues. White Sox look fantastic. Frankie Lindor got his first Mets hit in spring training, and the Yankees get Aaron Boone back. So very exciting to see the baseball teams take the field. They've looked so far good in spring training. We'll see what they can do coming up. We'll preview that season preview. We also have some NFL draft talk. We've teased it a little bit in some of these episodes, but we're going to start hammering it. It's getting close to that draft time. It's time where you start listening to the song Draft Day by Drake, and you start playing the chimes on your phone about a week before and change it to your ringtone. That's the best time of the year. But other than that, that's going to do it for today. You can check us out on all of our platforms. Spotify, we're also on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you leave a review there. YouTube, check us out, see our pretty little faces. And other than that, that's going to do it for today. Hope you enjoyed it. We will see you next time.